Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Housing Policy and Development Committee. I'm chair of the committee. My name is Cam Gordon. We have a agenda before us. This is October 10th, our regularly scheduled meeting. We have 7 items on the agenda. But before we go into the agenda, I'd like to give our staff an opportunity to introduce some new folks from CPET who have just started, and I don't necessarily want them to have to stay for the whole meeting, but I'm hoping that these will be familiar faces after a while for all of us. So I asked Ms. Skildum to come up and introduce the new staff.
Chair Gordon, committee, thank you. Just wanted to take a minute to introduce to the committee some new staff on the residential finance team. They are in the back row. Amy Geisler is joining us as in a newly created position, a supervisor position on my team. Supervising the senior project coordinators. She's back to the city after a period away over in St. Paul, and we're delighted to welcome her. Next to Amy is Jamie Radel, whose first day is today, and she is coming to us also from the city of St. Paul, from the planning department. She will be a senior project coordinator on the team. And next to her is Emily Carr, who's been with us for a couple of weeks now. She came from one of the Brooklyns. Park. Okay. I get those confused. I'm very sorry. She's joining us from the city of Brooklyn Park, also senior project coordinator on the team. So just so they're familiar faces to you when they have activities before the committee coming up. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And you're welcome to stay as long as you want, but now you've already been introduced. So I will read through the agenda and then I'll move the consent items unless any of my colleagues want to pull something off. But the first item is a land sale, and we'll have a public hearing on that. And then the 3 consent items are acknowledgement of Livability Communities Act Funding Award. Third item, second consent item, is approving exclusive development rights to Park Place Apartments for a period not to exceed 12 months. It's on a city-owned parcel at 2806 Park Avenue South. And the fourth item is passage of a resolution authorizing submission and priority ranking of our grant funding for the 2018 Metropolitan Council Livable Communities Demonstration Account grants. Then I'm going to just go ahead and move those 3 consent items, seeing no need for discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Say no. Any abstentions? That motion carries. There's also, I'll note that there are 3 discussion items on the agenda that will follow our first item, which is the land sale public hearing, and I believe we'll have a brief presentation on that.
Good afternoon, Chair Gordon, committee members. The staff is recommending the sale of 3110 Upton Avenue North through the Minneapolis Homes Program. The policies for the program were established by City Council on December 11, 2015, and further established on February 10, 2017. Staff recommends the sale of 3110 Upton Avenue North to Tyhan LLC for its appraised value of $40,000 subject to conditions. 3110 Upton Avenue North was acquired on October 20, 2017 from Hennepin County tax forfeited land for $40,000. Staff marketed this property with 2 open houses held in March 2018 and with notification to a listserv of now over 2,400 prospective developers and home buyers. This is the only application received for the property. Based on the program criteria established by the Minneapolis Homes Program Manual, used to evaluate all offers received, Tyhan LLC is recommended as the purchaser. To evaluate responsibility, the staff consulted with the Department of Regulatory Services staff to verify the status of vacant buildings, rental properties, and or other properties owned by the proposed purchaser in the city of Minneapolis, and there were no concerns. The property was constructed in 1908 as a 1,796 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, single-family house. The purchaser intends to invest $141,000 to rehabilitate 3110 Upton Avenue North as a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, single-family home and to market it exclusively to owner occupants. CPET's construction management staff reviewed the scope of work and estimates that were submitted by the applicant and confirmed that the scope and work estimates are sufficient to meet the minimum rehabilitation standards of the Minneapolis Homes Program. Notification was provided to the Jordan neighborhood on April 5th, 2018. And today, the developer, Alan Tang, is here representing Tyhan LLC. This will be his second project with CPET. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions. Thank you very much. Then I'll open the public hearing, and if Mr. Tang would like to come up and speak, this is a good opportunity to do so.
Hi, good morning.
Welcome.
My
Morning.
name's Alan Tang, and I'm here representing Taihan LLC. I'm the developer wishing to purchase 3110 Upton Avenue North.
Wonderful.
Any questions?
I don't see any questions. We certainly appreciate your willingness to take this on and help restore this home and sell it to another family.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on this matter? Seeing none, then I'll close the public hearing. And I will move item 1, the land sale for 3110 Upton Avenue North, forward for approval. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Any abstentions? That motion carries. That will bring us to our discussion items. The first is about Emergency Solutions Grant funding. This is a report back on a staff direction that this committee moved some time ago. Direction to evaluate and report on potential amendments to the consolidated plan that would include spending some of the ESG funding to support overnight emergency shelter operations. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Gordon and committee members. I'm Katie Topinka. I'm the Housing Policy Coordinator at CPED. And as you just mentioned, the Council gave CPED and Intergovernmental Relations staff direction to evaluate and report on potential amendments to the consolidated plan that would include spending some Emergency Solutions Grant or ESG funding to support overnight shelter operations. As a reminder, the city receives about $900,000 per year in ESG funds from HUD. The funds are currently used for street outreach, rapid rehousing, shelter rehabilitation and renovation, and program administration. Under HUD rule, the greater of 60% of our entitlement, or about $558,000, can be set aside for shelter rehab and renovation, essential services, outreach, and shelter operations. We currently set aside that 60% for shelter rehab and renovation and street outreach. About 44% is for shelter renovation and 16% for street outreach, with the city matching those funds. In response to the staff direction, we consulted with the Office to End Homelessness and inquired with shelter providers to better understand some of the needs in the system. We explored and continue to explore the capital needs and know that there are capital needs and will continue to be. And for these reasons, we recommend continuing to prioritize capital improvements. However, we also know that there has been an increase in the unsheltered adult homeless population. And since some capital improvements are less critical or time sensitive, and given the current context around that increase in unsheltered adult homelessness, we are coming forward to recommend a pilot within that essential services category that I mentioned earlier. The Office to End Homelessness and shelter providers identified an opportunity to address a specific need to target resources for case management for housing placement out of the large single adult shelters. The median length of stay in adult shelters is 96 nights, and a quarter of people in adult shelters have been there 238 nights or more. And by comparison, for family shelter, it's about 33 nights. So the pilot, the concept here, would focus on getting the long-term stayers out of the adult shelter system. And the goal is to see if this intensive case management would help to free up space in the shelter system, ultimately improving the capacity and function of the system overall. We make this recommendation while still prioritizing ESG funds for critical shelter rehab with a focus on life safety needs. If approved, we would evaluate the pilot and make recommendations going forward to determine perhaps how to build some flexibility into the system while maintaining rehab and renovation as a priority. So that's the overview. The next report you'll hear is more specifically in response to the capital RFP that went out this year. If the council does wish to move forward with a pilot, there would be a consolidated plan amendment is necessary. And again, it would be the case management would fall into that essential services category in that set aside. So I will stop there for questions.
So it sounds like even if there wasn't a pilot that's on the table right now, you're suggesting and you're recommending that there should be more flexibility with the spending I mean, that's what I'm hearing. I guess that I'll just say I wasn't necessarily expecting a plan for all that flexibility. At the same time, coming back with a recommendation about should we look at what else we could do with the funding. So things are getting. I also, though, I'm pleasantly surprised that there's this proactive approach, and can we hurry up and do something? So as soon as recognizing, oh, we should have more flexibility, and wow, look at this need. And I will note that I also met with shelter providers and went to one of their meetings and and also talked with somebody who'd been homeless for a long time and actually caught in the overnight shelter system for 2 years. And so there clearly is, I forget the statistic I heard, but it's a lot of people don't spend as much as 3 months or so. It's a short time period, and then they never go back to shelters. But if you're there for 3 months or maybe 6 months, then the likelihood that you'll be there in 2 years is greatly and dramatically increased. So there's some problem with the system, and we think the shelters should be somewhere where people go on a short-term basis and then they cycle through and they go on and they find stable housing. Well, they're not finding stable housing there. So I think there is a need for the kind of program you're talking about, at least in terms of the research that I've done. I'm not seeing any other questions on this right here. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it all sounds good on paper, and it's really good that you can kind of point out the difference between life safety and that pesky renovation and rehabilitation that really doesn't affect people's lives that much. But actually, one of my constituents is here today who followed the process, applied for ESG capital, has a major ESG issue, and I would like to have her heard about what won't be done so that we can do case management instead. Because actually this is like making the poor people fight over the crumbs. You're telling the people at the Bridge for Runaway Youth that have done everything we've asked them to do, including housing youth with children, creating Rita's house. We've done so much with them to do so many good things, and we're telling them that because you're not a life safety issue and you're also not case management, there isn't a place for us to help you do something that, as I understand it, is fairly critical. So perhaps the chair would indulge the good folks from the Bridge and let them explain their project, and then we can see why we're making everyone fight over the crumbs.
So I was hoping that maybe we could do that when we're talking about the actual funding allocations, which is the next item on the agenda. We could maybe shift that a little bit. Let me ask this question first, though, is how would we make the determination, what criteria would we put on things going into the future, let's say in 2019, even if we don't do a pilot now? How are we going to decide when it's a critical life safety issue that needs capital investing, or when we have other funds available for something like navigation or the pilot proposal you're bringing forward? And I don't know if somebody else wants to come up and add to that. Yeah. In terms of the life safety question, you guys feel free to work together.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. Tiffany Glass from the Program Manager for the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. Part of the application and intake process for the capital program for ESG is a site visit done by our construction management staff, and then a thorough review of the scope that they've submitted. And the purpose of that is twofold, really, to make sure that the items that have been identified as a need are in fact needed, to help us determine how critical that need is. Is it something that could maybe wait? Is it broken and needs to be fixed now? And then also to determine whether or not the scope that's been submitted is in line. So that is part of the application and review process that we perform.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Can I ask one additional question?
Of course.
So there's a whole bunch of ESG money that does not go to capital. It also goes to other things. Why couldn't the adult case management come out of that side of the ledger instead of having it come out of the capital side where there are pressing needs? I mean, in fact, I think there's more money that goes into staffing all of these different efforts versus capital. So if we think we need to do a pilot program, why wouldn't we do it out of that portion?
Yeah.
And are you talking about the street outreach mostly?
Well, it's not just street outreach. It's like hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's like $600,000-$700,000 that's not going to capital, that's already going to, or ESG, our allocation's what, like 1 point something million dollars.
Yeah,
I thought it was 920,000 this year and 550,000, I think is what we have for rehabilitation and renovation. But I might be wrong.
no, that, well, 558,000 is for the, or no, excuse me, the 60% of the 900,000 is for rehabilitation, renovation, and street outreach. And then the 40% is for rapid rehousing and administrative funds.
So maybe what I have to do is admit to myself that the two items have to get more mingled than I thought. So I have a staff direction that was going to tee up an amendment to our consolidated plan that maybe I haven't passed out, but you might have before you up here. But before I move that, I think maybe we should move on to item 6, and we can talk a little bit more about that as well and hear about the recommendations, if that's all right with committee members, because obviously these two things are kind of in sync and related. So,
And Mr. Chair, I want to say I don't have any objection with doing a pilot project with regard to single adult case management, but that seems to me to be an ongoing thing. You hire someone to do that case management, and then what are we going to be put in the position next year of saying, well, where's the money for that position? How does that not become ongoing, and how does that not come out of capital ongoing? These capital expenditures are by nature one-time expenses, although I would say Harbor Lights has had 6 times their one time. So, I mean, they've gotten quite a bit of money from us. But I do want to point out that by doing this pilot, if it became permanent, this would then become a permanent source of funding, and there'd be even less money for capital.
well, I appreciate that. It's a little bit more like the outreach, which is kind of the same thing happens with the outreach funding there. So maybe we can look at what the funds are, what they're going for, and if there's some flexibility in terms of implementing the pilot this year or not. And then I think we'll let somebody from the Bridge for Youth speak maybe after you make your presentation, Tiffany. Oh, and Councilmember Bender also wants, so well, while you get ready, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what you just said, but I actually was going to jump in and suggest that perhaps we do take up item number 5, which is more the overarching policy question and that our staff just spoke to, and then separately take up item 6, which is the recommendation for this year, because I think they are 2 separate questions. And while council members may have specific opinions about the particulars of this year's recommendation, I do think item 5 is sort of a standalone question that we ask staff to come back with, which they have, and I support your staff direction, however you want to handle it. But.
Well, I'm trying to figure out the will of the committee. You know, I like to lead by leading the group where they want to go. But I appreciate that as well. The two actions that we would take under 5 are receiving and filing the report we just heard, which has been concluded, and the staff direction. So if I'm happy to do that now, because even if the staff direction passes it, we haven't approved any of the funding for this year, but we've approved the, and I will. Why don't we do that, and we can discuss whether or not we should actually vote on them. But I will move that we receive and file the report, and I'll move the staff direction, being responsive to Councilmember Bender. And I can read the staff direction so everybody knows what it says. This is a direction to intergovernmental relations to prepare a substantial amendment to the city's HUD 2015-2019 5-year consolidated plan and the 2018 action plan, adding emergency shelter essential services for single adults as a funding priority and programming option in the city's emergency solutions grant strategy. The substantial amendment will be subject to a public hearing before this committee by the end of 2018. And staff of Intergovernmental Relations and Community Planning and Economic Development are further directed to work with the City of Minneapolis, Hennepin County Office to End Homelessness to identify how essential service case management activities at single adult shelters will be delivered. Is there any discussion on the staff direction that's been moved now? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Recognizing there's a lot of history to this discussion, I support this staff direction and the intention of when we take this up to look at the holistic need of funding and to certainly to have our staff review that. And I'm hearing from them the prioritization would still stay on those capital needs, but that this would provide a little bit more flexibility as we move forward.
Any other discussion then on the motion? I guess I move both items to receive and file in the staff direction. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. That motion carries. And now we'll move on to item number 6. Thank you.
Thank you,
Councilmember
Chair
Bender.
Gordon, Committee.
Welcome.
My name is Tiffany Glasper. I am a Senior Project Coordinator at CPED and the Program Manager for the Emergency Solutions Grant for the city. Each year, HUD provides Emergency Solutions Grant funds to the city of Minneapolis. These funds are eligible for street outreach, rapid rehousing, capital, and administrative costs. For 2018, $398,650 was available for emergency shelter capital renovation and rehabilitation. Each spring, the city issues a request for proposals for these funds. This year, the RFP was released in April, and we received 2 viable proposals totaling more than $600,000 in funding requests. The Bridge for Youth applied and requested $356,986 for complete renovation of their second-floor commercial kitchen and window replacement at their shelter facility. The Salvation Army requested $299,212 for interior renovations to the front entry and security desk of their shelter facility, which includes the upgrading of their security equipment. Staff's review of the proposals includes an on-site property inspection and review of the proposed work scope, a coordinated application review with staff from the Office to End Homelessness, which is new this year, review of the applicant's long-term operating capacity and financial status, project urgency and readiness, and compliance with the ESG and HUD regulations. Based on this review of the application, staff is recommending fully funding the Salvation Army request for $299,212. And we're further recommending a set-aside of $99,438 for the pilot initiative that we just talked about. The initiative would focus on intensive case management at one or both of the city's largest homeless shelters. And the focus of the pilot would be specifically to assist in getting some of the long-term shelter users out of the system and into permanent housing, thereby freeing up shelter capacity. The funding recommendations will allow Harbor Light Center to create a more secure, streamlined, and manageable client intake process, and also allow some program flexibility to find innovative ways to help improve the shelter system as a whole. I'm happy to field questions if there are any.
Do you have any objections if we let Bridge from Youth get up and speak?
Of course
briefly?
not.
All right.
Of course not.
Did you want the opportunity to come and present your ideas?
Thank you. I'm the Associate Director over at the Bridge for Youth. And yes, our request was for windows and a kitchen renovation. The fact is we don't have a kitchen on our second floor. So it's a brand new kitchen. And why do we need a new kitchen? Because we recognize the growing needs of homeless youth in the community, minor homeless youth with children. And in the spring, we're actually converting one of our shelter floors, currently that has 17 and 18-year-olds, into a program for pregnant and parenting homeless teens. So 16 to 20-year-olds that are pregnant or parenting that have no other programs in Hennepin County to go to will be able to come and have access to our third floor. In doing this, this means we have to restrict access to our third floor, which has the only kitchen in our building. That means our emergency shelter, which is on the second floor that has 14 youth every single night that are homeless unaccompanied minors in Hennepin County, will not have access to a kitchen. So how will they eat? So it is not that we want to build a fancy kitchen. It is not that we want to do renovations. We simply want to put infrastructure in place so that when a 16-year-old or 17-year-old comes to our program that is a minor, we can stabilize, get them the independence and self-sufficiency that they need to prevent them from going into an adult shelter. So it does touch on safety, it does touch on security, and it does touch on scale in that there are no other programs for homeless and pregnant teens in Hennepin County, and a basic need is food. This is a critical piece. The kitchen is just a kitchen, but it's a critical piece because without food, what are we going to do? It puts a significant kink into whether or not we can operate a pregnant and parenting homeless teen program, which the Office of Ending Homelessness is very much in support of. Actually, everybody that we've met with in Hennepin County is very much recognizing this as a need, and they're applauding our efforts for taking the step to do this. But not having a space that we can prepare food for the emergency shelter will certainly will hinder our ability to operate either of our programs, and just puts us in a very difficult decision on terms of who do we prioritize. Homelessness is a significant issue, and in our program, we're trying to stabilize to prevent these youth from ending up into long-term homeless shelters, many of which we do see families. The guardians are in Harbor Lights, and they're choosing not to take their children there. They're choosing to have their children stay at the bridge because of safety and security concerns. We work very closely with all of the providers, so we know the needs that are out there. And yes, this is much more than just a renovation. This is a brand new kitchen to address a growing need in our community. So happy to take any questions, but just appreciate your consideration on this. So
I just want to make sure that I'm clear. You have a kitchen on the 3rd floor now.
we have a kitchen on the 3rd. Right now, under our current license, we operate 2 housing programs in our campus. We operate our emergency shelter, which is on the 2nd floor, and that's for youth 10 through 17. And then on our 3rd floor, we offer a transitional, so meaning they can stay there longer for 16 up until 18-year-olds. What we are doing is we have been following the process and recognizing a growing need in the community. We're going to convert our 3rd floor, which is where there are 16 to 18-year-old single minors, into a program where there are single minor unaccompanied parents, so they can bring their children there. In doing so, one of the requirements is set forward and defined by our license under DHS is that we have to reduce and limit access. So the 2 floors can't interact. That means staff can't interact. That means youth can't interact. That means the client can't interact.
So you're adding a second kitchen, you're not closing one.
Nope, we're adding a
So you'll have
second
2.
one so that we can maintain our current capacity and serve a different audience.
Okay, I think I understand.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
Absolutely.
Any discussion, Council President Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we had a bit of this earlier, but it kind of got mixed in with the previous item. So I'm just noting that we had 2 capital requests. The one that staff is recommending for $299,212, and then this other one that was not recommended, which was for $356,986. And those 2 items combined exceed the amount of money that we had available for this particular grant. But the total amount of funding through this program overall is something like $920,000. So maybe you could walk us through that larger number and how we arrived at the number that's available for this particular grant program, and then help us understand why you recommended one of the capital choices and not the other.
Chair Gordon, Councilmember Bender. First, I want to acknowledge something that Councilmember Goodman said earlier, which was the overall amount of ESG that the city used to receive was significantly higher than what we're currently receiving. Why that is, my colleague Matt Bauer may be able to answer. So the amount of ESG available to the city, it's lower and lower and lower every year. Can you repeat your question? I'm nervous.
No, thank you. I'm reading the staff report, and it looks like there were 2 requests for capital.
That's correct.
The one that's you've recommended, which is the $299,000 for Harbor Light, and then this $356,000 ask
Correct.
that we just heard described. But the total of those 2 items combined exceeds the amount of money that was
That's right.
available.
Yes.
So I had 2 questions. One, could we spend more than was originally planned? Or 2, why did you recommend one and not the other?
Well, the answer to the first question is no, we can't spend more because we simply don't have it. The way that the ESG is kind of divided up, once we get it, again, my colleague Matt Bauer would be able to speak to that if there are specific questions about that. But frankly, the reason for the decision, I think we felt that because Harbor Light is one of the largest adult shelters in the system in our city, funding their proposal made complete sense. I mean, we're hearing, and in fact, you spoke about this when you were talking, that we're hearing in the community that there are people that shy away from Harbor Light because they don't feel safe. The intake process is kind of, it's just, it doesn't feel safe. So it makes sense to us to try and address that, and also to put the additional funds, to use the additional funds in a different way, but to try to address that same problem. So we're trying to address the safety and security issues at Harbor Light, and then with the $99,438, also trying to see if there's a way for us to increase capacity at that shelter. Does that answer your question?
She might have also been asking about, so we see in the report that there's 920,000, or give or take a little bit. Some of that has got to go to rapid rehousing, apparently. Some of that is already committed to street outreach, but we don't exactly know how much. There's a percentage number. And so then, I mean, reading it, then it sounds like once you gave the award to Harbor Lights.
Right. It sounds like there's a lot of money left over.
But there was only 99,000 left over.
Yeah. The amount of capital available to us this year was $398,650. And just as an example, when I first began working with the ESG program, the amount available for capital was probably 3 times that. I think I'm right about
And I just want to be clear, that's because we as a council already approved the funding to go to rapid rehousing?
Yep.
And the street outreach, that's already out the door?
That is part of the budget process. I believe Matt will be able to speak directly to that.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, so there's the $900,000 grant to the city. Then off of that, it's split certain ways. We talked about the 60%. 60% of that is, we can use up to 60% of it for street outreach, rehab, essential services in operations. Or we can use any amount of that for other uses like rapid rehousing. The 60% we've set aside for street outreach and the rehab. So this year there was like $150,000 for the street outreach. That was approved through the budget process. And then the $398,000 for this RFP. The balance of the grant, most of it goes to rapid rehousing, around $275,000. That goes for rapid rehousing services that are delivered through the county.
And that's already been approved and spent?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then admin for and then there's an admin piece for.
Correct.
Oh yeah, the rapid rehousing is required. I mean, anything outside of that 60% set aside has to be used for rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention. And the city is elected to use it for prioritize, and the county as well, prioritize for rapid rehousing as opposed to prevention.
So it sounds like what we had left to deal with this year before us right now is the 356.
98,000, yes.
390,000, okay. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did an RFP that asked for capital requests, not that asked for capital requests plus what could you do to move people out of Harbor Lights? So from where I sit, the $99,438 should go to the bridge. And if we want to, and I would actually support expanding single adult case management, we're in the budget process now. That seems like an ongoing thing, not a one-time thing. We should be dealing with that very good idea through the budget process, not through the ESG money that's been set aside for capital. And I don't want to pick on Harbor Light, but I want to be fair that Harbor Light has received $1 million+ out of this pool over a long period of time. And if you can't rattle off the amounts, I'm pretty sure the bridge can. And they can point out how much money we've put into Harbor Light. At the same time, their executives are meeting with a number of us to tell us they want to get out of the Harbor Light. They came in and told me point blank they weren't even sure they wanted to operate shelter in that site anymore. and I know Ms. Brennan was in the room, she's looking the other way because she wishes she wasn't in the room for that conversation. But the truth of the matter is, on one hand, they're telling us they're not even sure they want to be doing this work anymore, and on the other hand, they're collecting millions from us to improve their building that they essentially told me they would tear down. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll float out there the idea that we would put the 99,000 that went out in an RFP for capital into capital and suggest we do the single adult case management the other way. But I'm also happy to take the money out of Harbor Light.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, my concern with the suggestion as made was that it leaves a pretty significant gap for the proposal that came from the bridge. And so the question would be, you know, is there capacity to raise $200,000 in another way? We could also postpone this item one cycle and take some time, just knowing the good work that you did to look through the details of these proposals and not try to kind of second guess that here in committee, and just give ourselves time to get educated as committee members about some more of those details. And I don't know if there's a time sensitivity to the, you know, if the 2 weeks delay would be okay with the grant cycle, but that's another suggestion.
Do you have a?
In my opinion, a 2-week delay really isn't going to make or break us. I mean, we are up against some commitment deadlines and spending deadlines, but the spending deadline is more than a year and a half out. Of the commitment deadline, we've got another 3 or 4 months probably.
So that we could consider that a potential motion. We could also move it forward without recommendation, but that would, and to see if we could come up with something before the council meeting, which was an idea that I was thinking, because we seem a little bit stuck and we don't have a lot of information, especially in terms of what the 99 could be used for. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm okay with the delay. I think that's a good idea. I'm pretty sure the request was for more than just the kitchen, and some things are more important than others. And so we could ask Chris. I don't know. I'm not in charge. If you want to let Christine talk about, is that something that's workable? That's fine with me. If not, we can delay until we can find out if that's okay. We also can talk about whether or not expanding single adult case management is something that could be in the overall budget, not out of this pool. I will say the downtown council worked in partnership with a lot of downtown businesses to identify moving 100 people out of the Harbor Light, and they used a lot of private money to do that, and they were able to succeed in that. So I am a believer, given that the private sector has done this work, that this is a good thing to do. I just don't think it's fair that you do an RFP for capital and then say, well, sorry, we don't really want to spend it on capital when there are capital needs. We should have said that we were going to do something different when we issued the RFP then. So however you want to handle it, move it forward without recommendation, delay one cycle, or you can take up my motion. I'm happy to move to just grant the other money to the bridge, but I'm also happy to go along with postponing it.
Well, I prefer to have more of the discussions outside of the committee meeting in terms of what, having you come out and speak again. And I'm open to either potential for the delay. I think whether it's held it in committee or not. Councilmember Schrader, did you have a?
Sure, I would support delaying it for 2 weeks just to get a little bit more information. I'd also be interested to hear what the bridge would be able to do with 99 with the other money.
Councilmember Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we'll go ahead and move to postpone one cycle and bring it back to committee if that's okay with the chair, just to give ourselves more time and follow up with all the partners, and also voice my appreciation to Harbor Light, to the bridge, to Hennepin County, our partners, and housing people, and the staff who put time into this.
Of course, it's all right to me, but any committee members can move anything they want, even if it's not all right with the chair in this committee. So anyway, I think that seems reasonable. I do want to note that I think that we've highlighted a really dramatic need, and I appreciate that Councilmember Goodman was even saying that navigating folks through the shelter system is a big problem, and it's a really big snag. Did you want to make a comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, it would be helpful for us to have a little bit better sense of exactly what you want us to do in the interim between this meeting and next meeting. If you want, is it additional information that you want us to meet with you about offline, or is there additional analysis that you want us to do? I mean, we've reviewed the requests and made our recommendations. So if you could just provide us with a little bit more direction as to what you want us to do in the next 2 weeks, that would be really helpful.
I think there's some interest in having some dialogue with the second applicant that wasn't approved for funding, to see if there's, and maybe look more into that and to see if there is some critical need that would rise to the level and that the funds would actually assist with. That's what I picked up from some comments down there. Council Member Bender.
Yes, Mr. Chair, my intention was just that, to allow the committee members really more than staff to be able to do some extra homework and not to try to ask two really essential providers of services in our community to kind of like stand up here and make their case to us because of all the work that staff has already done. So I think it was more for council members to have time to ask our questions offline.
Okay, appreciate that. So I don't think there'll be a staff direction actually, but hopefully you got enough of a sense about why we're stuck up here. And maybe we'll reach out to you individually, separately, to learn more. Seeing no other discussion on the motion then, all those in favor of the one cycle delay, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. And now we'll move on to our last item, which is tenant case management. I believe that Noah Schuckman is here to make a report. I should also note that we're joined by Councilmember Cano. I think it was this item that, but appreciate you being here for all of this. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, committee members, Noah Schuckman, Director of Regulatory Services. I can speak briefly to the, the staff direction portion of this item, which is to direct regulatory services and CPED staff to develop a scope of services budget and to select a qualified external partner to supply tenant case management related to the Stephen Friends rental dwelling license revocations for the remainder of 2018. I just want to acknowledge Mr. Frank and CPED staff who are contributing to this as well, and this is something that we are in the process of working on, identifying a potential provider to mirror some of the efforts that have happened on the north side around the Kahn case and some of the tenant relocation efforts that have been needed and that the city doesn't have capacity to handle without an external partner.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here. I just want to note that on the agenda, I noted that there would be an opportunity for community comment. This was in light of, at a previous council meeting we had, there seemed to be some people that really felt a need to make comment about this issue. You might recall that, council members. Is there anybody here who did want to comment on this from the public? Okay, then. Appreciate that. Any discussion? Councilmember Cano?
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Chairman Gordon, I appreciate the time to take up this issue and to have the committee take action on this. We did hear from two tenants last time when we were meeting on the homeless encampment issue, and I was notified a few minutes before the meeting started today that the tenants they were hoping to bring today to share their stories had all had to be at work, and so they couldn't take time off and not have those paid hours to be able to come here and testify in front of our committee to share their experiences. But nonetheless, I think a lot of us already know this story, and you all as a committee have already addressed this issue in other parts of our city, so it's not a new story. I don't think that it's something we need extensive discussion on. I think we all realize that housing the folks in our city who are experiencing pressures from landlords and evictions and other things that are happening in our city, whether it's new development or losing affordable housing at rates that our city is new to seeing. That this committee is willing to take action, willing to address that, and so I'm very happy to have been able to work with our city staff who provided leadership on this front as well. And we do have another partner, the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, who is also at the table actively proposing ideas on what we can do here. So I'm hoping that this is not the end of a conversation, but a continued look at how we can more systemically and proactively address some of the issues that we've been dealing with for quite some time, especially when it comes to the Friends properties.
Councilmember Ellison.
Just wanted to name that, this is an issue that we've dealt with on the north side, and I'd hate to take this moment to kind of pontificate, but I also think to kind of piggyback off what Councilmember Cano said, this is work that's going to have to continue, and I look at this portfolio, the Friends portfolio, and also a lot of the Mahbub Khan portfolio, and I think to myself, this is a group of tenants who would be supported by the work that council members Goodman and Schrader are getting ready to move. These are tenants who are going to be supported by the work that the council president and I are looking to move. And I think that I think this is a great action, and I agree that this is going to be the continuation of a conversation and not the end of it, because we've got a lot of work to do. And I want to thank staff for putting this work in, and just kind of nail down the importance of the work that we're doing around tenant protections on all fronts. So, yeah.
Maybe I could take that as a motion to move the staff direction forward.
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was also, I really wanted to just highlight all of the work that has gone into making sure that when we are revoking rental licenses, that our tenants are supported. And that has been really important work that our staff has done, along with many council members, since we first started dealing with these number of situations many years ago. And I think it's really important, and it just shows our commitment, but that, and I think in particular conversations that we've heard about recently are not necessarily related to license revocations, and are just the impact of having one of the lowest vacancy rates in the country, a growing population, and tenants who don't have the protections they need in our marketplace. And so also wanted to name those two ordinances that are coming up, the building sale notification ordinance that Councilmember Goodman and Schrader are bringing very soon, and then the other one that Councilmember Ellison and I are working on, hopefully to bring early next year. And really that has to be part of the solution of particularly those tenants who are just experiencing the pressure of our marketplace and the lack of protection. And also just, again, reiterate how important the legal services are to those tenants, and the impact we've seen from a couple of pilot programs that some of the foundations in the county have done to give legal representation to tenants who are in these situations. They're seeing dramatically better outcomes than those who are in housing court trying to represent themselves on top of everything else.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on Councilmember Ellison's motion? It's the motion to direct regulatory services and community planning and economic development staff to develop a scope of services and budget, and to select a qualified external partner to supply tenant case management related to the Stephen Friends rental dwelling license revocations for the remainder of 2018. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. That motion carries. And seeing no further business before us, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.